What would happen if a nuclear submarine were placed in space? First of all, the nuclear submarine would not explode. This is because the hull of the nuclear submarine is extremely hard. It can usually withstand water pressure environments of 50 to 80 atmospheric pressures. When the nuclear submarine is placed in space, the nuclear submarine only needs to handle 1 atmosphere of pressure inside. This is completely a piece of cake for the nuclear submarine. However, the nuclear submarine will soon face the issue of lack of oxygen inside. Normally, the nuclear submarine extracts oxygen from the water. But there is no water in space. Therefore, the nuclear submarine cannot provide oxygen to the crew any longer. In fact, the greatest threat the nuclear submarine faces in space is extremely high temperatures. Since the temperature in space is much higher than that in the ocean, the temperature of the nuclear submarine would increase rapidly. At this point, you might think that I am mistaken. How can the temperature in space be higher than that in the ocean? On the surface, space is empty, it should be very cold. But the reality is that space in satellite orbit is actually quite warm. This is because temperature is determined by the intensity of particle movement. In the space near Earth, the kinetic energy of molecules can reach several thousand degrees. Since the temperature in space is so high, then why don't we feel a burning sensation in space? When I was a child, I often saw a scene like this. Whenever a repairman used fast spinning gears to rub against metal, sparks would fly. These sparks often landed on his hands and clothes. I was very curious at the time why these sparks did not burn him. Later, I learned that the reason the sparks didn't harm him was that these sparks were small. The environment in space is just like the sparks here. Although the temperature of molecules in space is very high, their quantity is too small to affect the temperature of a nuclear submarine at all. In reality, the temperature of a nuclear submarine is mainly determined by heat production and heat dissipation in space. Due to the lack of a heat dissipation medium like air or water, the only way for a nuclear submarine to dissipate heat is through radiation. However, radiation is usually not an effective way to dissipate heat. This is why space is warm. For most aircraft, the main issue it faces in space is not keeping warm, but rather heat dissipation. A nuclear submarine typically carries a 200 megawatt nuclear reactor. Due to the lack of effective heat dissipation methods, the heat produced by a 200 megawatt nuclear reactor is enough to raise the entire nuclear submarine by 41 degrees Fahrenheit per minute. Ultimately, as heat continues to accumulate, the nuclear submarine will be melted by high temperatures.